Good afternoon. Many thanks for making the time to join the meeting this afternoon. My name's Steve Smith. I'm an independent facilitator, so it's my job to keep us on track and keep us on time and make sure we have a useful and productive meeting this afternoon. We'll most certainly finish by 7 o'clock, and we've got a really interesting program of presentations and questions and answers, I think. So I hope it'll be a useful time usefully spent. Yeah, I'm also working on a community learning and action project sort of within Caterham on the Hill and Old Coulsdon around flood risk and longer term sort of impacts of climate change. So I do know the town, and I'm very aware of the issues, as well as sort of designing and facilitating meetings. So this afternoon's meeting, it's mainly focused on giving information and taking your comments and questions on proposed flood alleviation measures and options. But we're also going to look a little bit wider at whole community possibilities to work on flood risk actions. And I'll mention a little bit about the programme that I'm sort of leading on a little bit later on in the meeting, about sort of longer term options and possibilities and actions and community learning around flood risk and climate change. Normally this sort of meeting would be run as a drop-in in a community hall, so this is a new format for us, so I hope people will bear with us a little bit as we try and manage the information and the presentations and the slides and the questions and answers. So but I'm sure we'll be able to do that well. I'm supported by a team of people, of specialists and experts in flood risk management, who are going to be providing some of the presentations and inputs and responding to questions and comments. And after the meeting, we'll write up we'll make the slides available, the presentations available to you, and we'll write up the questions and answers and add those to the frequently asked questions, and we'll explain how you access all that at the end of the meeting. It's quite an auspicious day today, actually, because the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy has been published. So again, we'll put the link to that in the notes, and you may be interested in looking at the national strategy and how that might sort of impact on local options and measures. So that was published today after about 3 years of work, I think, which we've been helping to do the consultation on. Right, so what I'll do first is I'll go through what we're hoping to achieve from the meeting. So we could pass to the next slide. So what we're hoping is by the end of this meeting, by 7 o'clock, you'll be much better informed about flood risk in Caterham on the Hill and Old Coulsdon. Understand what can be done fairly immediately, and in particular look at property flood resilience measures and how they could help. So actually sort of working on individual properties and protecting individual properties, and what are the possibilities for that. We've got a couple of slots for questions and answers, which I'll explain how we'll manage it in a little bit. And I hope we will have been able to sort of respond to some of the queries that you may have, or some of the comments that you'd like to make. And also, we hope that you'll know a little bit more about wider community-based projects to support flood risk planning and resilience building. So not only what individuals can do, or to support individuals who are at risk of flooding, but things that could be put in place in the wider community, and also around sort of community learning and action on a longer term basis. So that's what I hope we'll achieve. I'll go through the programme. If we could move to the next slide, please. So we've got five short sessions, and generally there'll be a presentation for each session, and we've got a couple of slots for questions and answers. So in a minute I'll hand over to Tor Peebles, who is the Flood Risk and Partnerships Team Leader for Surrey County Council, to give you a general overview about the situation in Caterham and Old Coulsdon. Then we'll have a presentation by Beth Waring, who is an environmental scientist, works for Atkins, the consultants, and she's been doing the a lot of the flood risk assessments and modelling and looking at the preferred options, in particular for property level flood risk management. So Beth will take us through a little bit of the sort of like the science and the research behind some of the preferred options. Then we'll have a pause for 15-20 minutes, questions and answers. So while you're listening to the presentations, you may want to be thinking about, you know, did I really understand that? You know, what does that actually mean? If there's anything you're unsure about, you can ask a question. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. And we've got a panel of people who will try to direct those questions to. So we've got George Rice and Tor from Surrey County Council, Viv Riddle from Tandridge District Council, who can take sort of planning strategy questions, Dicey Osibana from the London Borough of Croydon around drainage and flooding, Nick Philpott and Emma Crofts from the Environment Agency, and Julie Blackburn from the Caterham Flood Action Group, who can probably take community-based questions and things that have been happening in the community over the last few years. Then session 3, we'll take a look at sort of wider whole community flood risk management issues and measures, and George and Emma will present on those different aspects of those, so what the whole community could get involved in to reduce flood risk. And again, we'll have a short session for discussion and questions after that. Session 4, I'll give a little bit of an oversight into the project that we've been working on, which is looking a little bit further into the future, and it's a project around community learning and action in terms of living with climate change and, you know, the implications for the local community. And then Tor will round up at the end and set out the next steps in terms of the reporting from this meeting, but also things that you can also get involved in, and how you might, you know, look at property level flood protection if you're at risk of flooding. And as I said, we'll finish at 7 o'clock. So I hope that's all right. I hope people can stick with us through that that time. I think it'll be a series of interesting sessions. In terms of having a good meeting, because it's quite a novel meeting like this, and normally we'd be in a community hall. Just to avoid the kind of background buzz and noise and so on, because I guess everyone's dialing in from home, we're going to mute everybody apart from the speakers, so that people can hear loud and clear. So I hope that's okay. In terms of asking questions and making comments, if you sort of hold the cursor down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a chat function. And what we'd encourage you to do is, as we go through the presentations, is to use that chat function to flag up your questions. So if you've got any questions, or there's anything that you didn't understand, or anything you disagreed with that you want to make a comment on, please put it in the chat function. And then what we'll try and do is, as the presentations go on, we'll try to look for the questions that keep coming up, and we'll pitch those to the panel of presenters and speakers to respond to those. We've got a certain amount of time, and we'll try and get through as many questions and comments as possible. But if any we miss, we'll pick those up at the end of the meeting and put those into the reporting back to you at the end. So please do use the chat function as we go through the presentations, and make any comments there. And I'll try and keep track of those as we go through, so that we can ask the right question to the right people. If there's any interruptions, if you need to go off and do something, please do. I know people are dialing in from home and often are busy, or things are happening in the background, or there's things you have to attend to. But you can tune back into the webinar at any time up until 7 o'clock. So please do that. Yeah, any questions, please put them on the chat, and we'll try to respond to those if you're having any problems. If you're having any sort of connection problems, turning off your screen may help if you have it on. I think most of you have turned it off already, but doing that may just make it a little bit clearer. So I hope that's okay. Yeah, I think that's as much as I wanted to say by introduction. So I'm now going to hand over to Tor Peebles to give a little bit of an overview of the sort of flood risk management situation locally before we get into the specifics of options. Okay, thanks, Tor.
Thanks, Steve. Hopefully I'm audible to everybody. Just let me grow this to full screen size. So my name is Tor, and I'm the Flood Risk Management Strategy and Partnerships Team Leader at Surrey County Council. Thank you very much for making the time to attend this event, and thank you very much for your patience for the peculiar circumstances in which we're having to have it virtually rather than in person. My involvement with Caterham started in 2016, and I'm fortunate to have met some of you in person throughout this time. It recalls to me to introduce the catchment, the scope of work that we've been working on as risk management authorities. And just so you know, for ease of presenting my few slides, I'm going to refer to the catchment as Caterham rather than as Caterham on the Hill and Old Coulsdon, because it is a bit of a mouthful, as I'll be repeating it several times throughout the slides. So please look at the map on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, which shows the area of Surrey and Croydon to the north. And in particular, you can see a number of blue squares, and those are squares that through the preliminary flood risk assessment have been highlighted as areas at risk of surface water flooding. The area that we're interested in, which is the catchment of Caterham on the Hill and Old Coulsdon, is in the dark blue sort of outline inside the red box. And it's the area inside the blue outline that we're really going to focus on. The area to the east and west and to the south actually form neighbouring topographic catchments. Those are the areas of Whiteleaf and Caterham Valley to the east, and the area of Cholden to the west. Those areas do have separate flood risk issues, and we're going to be focused on this particular catchment, which affects the area that you're in. By looking at the terrain in detail on the right-hand side of your screen, we can see that the ground is high in the southern area, so that's the bit closer to the middle of the screen. And if we follow the light blue shading towards the top of the screen, so that's in the northerly direction, we can see that the ground forms a steep-sided valley which runs from Queen's Park north across the administrative boundary from Surrey and Tandridge into Croydon. The blue shading shows the areas which are modelled to be at risk of surface water flooding. These are a little bit easier to see in the map to the right-hand side of the screen now. This is an Ordnance Survey map of our catchment, which is outlined in grey. The soil is of clay over the top of chalk, and the result of that is that water runs off the topsoil very quickly. The area is also densely populated or urbanised, with many roads cutting across the valley bottom, such as Money Road. The blue shading again shows the area of surface water flood risk, which flows from Queen's Park through Caterham and joins a second flow route which comes from Nineham's Close on the northern side of Colton Common. As the flow enters Caterham Drive, along which the flow then passes and out into the woods beyond. The area has approximately 205 properties which are at high risk of surface water flooding. And in 2016, we recorded 79 properties being flooded internally and a further 53 properties being flooded externally, such as flooding in the garden or outbuildings, such as a garage. In addition to that significant event in 2016, the catchment has a number of smaller localised events on a more frequent basis, such as flooding of the highway caused by inundation of the highway drainage by surface water, and flooding of the foul sewer network, again through surface water inundating that network. The result of that is a constant stream of smaller flood incidents which is punctuated by the more significant floods of 2016, where we see essentially the rising of a surface water borne throughout the catchment. So what has happened so far? Since 2016, the authorities and community have undertaken a number of projects and tasks which reduce the risk and impacts of flooding. The most noteworthy of which, to me, is the formation of the Caterham, Hill and Old Coulsdon Flood Action Group, which was formed in late 2016 with some assistance from the National Flood Forum and is now run by members of the community. The group has led to this catchment being selected as one of the 2 study areas nationally for a project examining roles of community within the climate change setting. In addition to this, planning policy has been developed and implemented by the London Borough of Croydon, which requires developers to reduce runoff from minor developments as well as from major developments, a policy which has been adopted in the borough and will, over the long period of time of a local plan, will show incremental improvements to the area's runoff. Other more traditional flood risk management work has also taken place. This has included the maintenance of the Money Pit, a water storage chamber by St Michael's Road, improvements to the highway drainage network in Croydon, and surveys and maintenance of the highway drainage network in Surrey. Thames Water, as the utility company, have also undertaken an extensive survey of their network and carried out the minor repairs where they were necessary. Amongst the authorities, we have also commissioned an investigation to bring together the flood risk models and the sustainable drainage model to develop a list of possible interventions to reduce flood risk wholesale. This has produced a long list of options, which we have now been able to refine. And that's really what's led us to the situation we're in today. So where we are at the moment, Tandridge has also developed a planning policy, which is currently sat with a planning inspector with exactly the same aims as London Borough of Croydon, which is to reduce the runoff from developments, both major and minor, and set the conditions for an incremental reduction in runoff from new development and where places are being redeveloped. We are also pleased to be involved as one of the community change and action projects with the aim of developing engagement techniques for future projects and provide national guidance to authorities such as Surrey County Council and the Environment Agency. And that's really what has brought us to this particular meeting. And the other item, which is the main task on the project board's mind at the moment, is having a conversation with you about the property flood resilience option for this catchment, which has come out of the analysis of flood risk modelling carried out by Atkins. To go into this further, I'll hand over to Beth Waring, who is the brains of the outfit. Beth has developed the modelling technique used to assess the benefits of different flood risk options. It's only fitting for her to talk us through that journey. Over to you, Beth.
Okay. Yeah, Bethel's coming up, but just remember too, if you've got any questions or comments, please use the chat function, and then we'll take questions after Beth's presentation.
Paul, can you stop sharing your screen?
Hi everyone, my name's Beth. I'm an environmental scientist at Atkins, and I've been working on the Caterham on the Hill flood alleviation scheme for the past 4 years. I wanted to first take you through a summary of our appraisal to date. We have been working to understand the main flood risk areas and the flood risk mechanisms within the Caterham on the Hill and Old Coulsdon catchment. We developed a list of all the possible options to reduce flood risk within the catchment. We then assessed these options, technically, financially, and environmentally, to see which ones had the potential for further consideration. This gave us our shortlist of options, which we then assessed in more detail. Following central government appraisal guidance, we have concluded that property flood resilience is the preferred option for this flood alleviation scheme, and I'll explain a bit more about property flood resilience shortly. We are currently finalising the funding application, which we call the outline business case, or OBC for short, for Environment Agency approval. And we will also be seeking funding for the Property Flood Resilience Scheme. Alongside this, Surrey County Council, the London Borough of Croydon, Tandridge District Council, the Environment Agency and Thames Water are all working together to implement a longer-term suite of intervention measures, which they will talk you through after this presentation. We have built a computer model to simulate the flood risk within the catchment. We have used this model to understand the flood risk and the flood risk mechanisms in the catchment. The main flood risk mechanisms in the catchment are drainage exceedance and overland flow. As I'm sure you're all aware, the catchment is very steep and urbanised, and this contributes to the flood risk. We describe flood events in terms of their frequency of occurrence in any one year. So, for example, a 5% annual probability flood event means that there's a 5% chance of that storm occurring that year. You might have also heard the phrase a 1 in 20 chance of a flood event. This is the same probability, just described in a different way. Properties that are at risk of internal flooding in a 5% or 1 in 20 annual probability flood event, or more frequent flood events, are considered to be at severe risk of flooding. You can see from the flood outlines shown on the map to the right that the flood extent doesn't really change with the probability of a storm event. On the map, the darkest blue represents the 5% or 1 in 20 annual probability flood extent. And when this is compared to the 1.3% or 1 in 75 annual probability flood extent in the middle shade of blue, or even the 0.5% or 1 in 200 annual probability flood event in the lightest blue, you can see that the extent doesn't change very much. And this is because the catchment is so steep. What is not shown on this map is that the depth of water does change with the probability of the storm event. The catchment is very long and thin, so it's difficult to show it clearly on one map. This slide shows the same map, but for the downstream or northern half of the catchment. Here we have an animation from the computer model of the catchment. It shows a 5% or 1 in 20 annual probability event that runs over 90 minutes. So from this, you can see the short, sharp nature of the flood events in the catchment. As I mentioned previously, we developed a list of all the possible options to reduce flood risk within the catchment. We then assessed these options technically, financially, and environmentally to see which ones had the potential for further consideration. This then gave us our short list of options, which we then assessed in more detail. So you can see the short list of options are listed on the screen and are also shown on the map to the right. The first option that we modelled was actually what would happen if we just continued with the existing maintenance in the catchment. Currently, Surrey County Council, the London Borough of Croydon and Thames Water undertake regular maintenance work within the catchment. Our assessment of this option showed that the maintenance within the catchment is very worthwhile. It reduces the risk of flooding and is economically viable. The next option that we looked at was option 1, a proposed earth embankment to store flood waters in Queen's Park. Now, the option is located in a very upstream area of the catchment, which means it would only be possible to store a small volume of flood water here. It would not be possible to store enough water to make a big difference to the flood risk of properties across the catchment. The next option that we looked into was option 2, so it's proposed underground storage at Hillcroft Primary School. Underground storage options are technically very difficult, and on top of this, it would be very expensive. It would also not be possible to store enough water here to make a big difference to flood risk of the properties downstream. The next options we looked at were options 3 and 4, flood storage in the west and the east of Coulsdon Common. Again, these were proposed earth embankments. As you know, the catchment is very steep. And to be effective flood alleviation options, these two flood storage areas would need to store a lot of water. We worked out early on that we couldn't just have one single embankment and flood storage area in each location because it just couldn't store enough water. So to maximise water storage in these areas, we looked at maximising the number of earth embankments that we would use, so almost creating a cascade of embankments. So for option 3, on the west of Coulsdon Common, this meant 3 1-metre high earth embankments. And for option 4, in the east of Coulsdon Common, this meant 9 1-metre high earth embankments. And this still didn't store enough water to make a technically viable solution. And on top of this, it wouldn't be in keeping with the landscape of the common to have all these earth embankments. So these options were discounted from the appraisal because of their technical, economic and environmental viability. However, they are each being taken forward in different forms as part of the longer-term suite of intervention measures in the catchment, and this will be explained more after my presentation. So, property flood resilience offers individual resilience to properties at the highest flood risk and across the whole catchment. So we concluded that this option is technically, economically and environmentally viable and is therefore the preferred option for the outline business case and is what we're taking forward. Property flood resilience involves installing measures to increase the ability of a property to cope with flooding and limits the damage that the flooding has on a property. These measures include flood doors. These look exactly like normal doors, but they have special seals that stop the water from getting into a house through the door. Air brick covers. These don't look very different to air bricks themselves. The cover still allows air to circulate, however, it stops water from getting into the house through the air bricks. Waterproofing. This is generally to walls to stop any seepage of flood waters through the walls of a house. Often this is a sealant that's applied to the walls, which actually doesn't change the way the walls look. Or non-return valves. These can be fitted onto existing pipes and they allow the normal passage of water to flow away from the building, but the flap will not allow any overflow water caused by flooded pipes back into the property. Now these are only some of the property flood resilience measures. Because the flood events in the catchment have very little warning, permanent property flood resilience measures will be needed to be installed in this catchment. Once we had determined that property flood resilience was our preferred option, we then needed to identify which properties were eligible to be included in the scheme. Industry guidance states that for a property to be eligible for property flood resilience, they need to either have been historically flooded and for this to have been recorded on a Risk Management Authority list, so for example on the local council's flood history database, or to have been modelled to be at significant risk of flooding, and this is to be at risk of flooding from a 5% or 1 in 20 annual probability flood event or greater. Following this criteria, 205 properties have been identified to be included within the proposed scheme. A letter has been sent to these 205 properties. So we have shown you the area that is covered by the scheme, and unfortunately we can't offer property flood resilience to everybody. However, if you live in the Caterham on the Hill and Old Coulsdon catchment, and you have evidence that you have been internally flooded in the past and you have not received this letter, please do get in touch. For those who did receive the letter, it invited you to fill out a form to express your interest in the scheme. The deadline to fill out the expression of interest form has now been extended to this Friday, Friday the 17th of July. The more interest that there is from the 205 properties, the more likely that the scheme will be able to progress. So now moving on to the costs of this. If we assume 100% uptake, so all 205 properties would like property flood resilience to be installed, we estimate that this would cost about £1.8 million, or about £10,000 per household. Following industry guidance, our business case estimates that central government will pay for about 74% of the total cost. So this is equivalent to about £1.3 million if the scheme is approved. And this would leave about £500,000 to be funded by third-party contributions. It is likely that the Thames Regional Flood and Coast Committee and local councils will fund the majority of this difference. So I thought it would be useful to give you a bit of an idea of what to expect regarding the timescales of this project. We are hoping that the project will get approval of funding in September. Following the approval of funding, the project board will appoint a property flood resilience contractor, and this contractor will then undertake property flood resilience surveys on all of the properties that are interested. And this will involve the property flood resilience contractor looking at each of the points of floodwater entry to each individual property and identifying specific property flood resilience measures that are suitable for each household. If a property already has property flood resilience measures in place, the survey would then assess the effectiveness of the existing measures and then potentially recommend improvements. The property flood resilience surveys would take about 4 months. After this has been completed, we then would move into the installation phase. So this would involve preparing the legal agreements with residents and then arranging the installation and then installing the measures themselves. And installation generally takes about 2 to 3 days per property. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I'd like to ask if you have any questions first, and then we'll move on to session 3, the whole community flood risk management measures, options and possibilities.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Beth. I can see there's a few comments and questions coming in. Should we just pause for 30 seconds or so just to allow you to do the thinking, because there was a lot of information there. So please do write any questions, comments, queries in the chat box, and then we'll pitch those either to Beth or to the relevant person. So I'll just give people a few moments to think and to write, and then we'll take those over the next quarter of an hour or so.
So I'm just scrolling down the list here. Hazel, I see your question. The email address is flooding.inquiries@surreycc.gov.uk, which we'll send out again at the end of this letter, so at the end of the presentation, so you've got that. If you just want to let them know, I know which house you're in terms of getting that information over to us.
Okay, are there any more questions you can take, Tor?
Just a second, I'm just scrolling through. At the moment, this is to Adele McCutcheon. At the moment, I don't think that you'll be able to claim anything back, but that's a good question, and we haven't even looked at that. So at the moment, no, but I think we will take that as away as a question for the authorities to look at, because we haven't considered that in the round.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. So I'll try and factor these in. So development and drainage was the first question we got. Viv, I know you were struggling a little bit with audio. Basically about, or Dicey for that matter, either you can pick this up. So if we allow lots of development in the catchment, there's an obvious risk there, as it were, to people. How do we tackle that, and do we just need to input more drainage? Does anyone on the panel want to pick that up?
Sorry, I can't actually see that question. Where is it?
That was a question just sent to me, but it regarded, it was a bit, I could read it out, I think. Yeah, this is, I'm mindful of global climate change. However, it does not seem rocket science to me that if you carry out massive development to our area without providing adequate drainage, there will be flooding. As owner-occupiers suffer huge rises in our buildings and contents insurance, and the value of our property has been compromised. So it's kind of a comment, but if you want to say anything.
Well, I think probably, as Tor mentioned earlier, Tandridge in their local plan are have proposed a policy to secure sustainable urban drainage systems on all properties. At the moment, we can't actually secure it. We can do it for schemes of 10 units and above, but that's pretty much it at the moment. But it's something we are looking at, and I believe Croydon already do this.
Okay, so George, do you want to pick up the next question? I think there's one about.
Yeah, that's great. So I think Tor mentioned the one about a letter. So contact details we'll put at the end of the presentation. If you haven't had a letter yet, we'll feel free to contact us, and we can pick that up. Regarding claiming anything back from money already spent, this isn't a reclaim scheme. We have looked at it, and there is advice there. Beth, do you want to jump in on that one potentially? Or Nick?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of reclaiming, it's not part of this scheme. If your property is included in the PFR scheme and you have received a letter, then we can still get set PFR surveys out if you're interested, and then they can assess the effectiveness of those measures and see if there's anything more that can be done to protect your property. If that answers your question.
Thanks, Beth. What experience do we have of property resilience measures as a board? Probably one for Beth or Nick or Emma.
So there are some really good examples from the relatively recent flooding in the winter 2019 or 2020 flooding of PFR measures working really effectively. There's been recently a webinar that was posted by that was organised by SciWem, and they did a 3-part webinar on property flood resilience measures. And the third webinar, which I think the links we can send out, or you can find it just by Googling SciWem property flood resilience. They have a section where they show examples of property flood resilience working, and it's really good. It looks really great, and it really does work.
Okay. Thanks, Beth. Maybe we'll put a link to that on the FAQs. That would be a useful thing. Mary in Caterham Drive recently bought the property, not sure if it's been flooded before, doesn't appear to have had a letter. So yeah, just contact at the flooding.inquiries at surreycc.gov.uk email address, and we'll forward that on to Dicey down in Croydon and just see what's what there. But yeah, we can pick that up and see if that's one of the ones that's been picked up. We've got your address there as well, so we can do that for you, Mary. Chris Windridge, number of responses. Al, do you want to give us the number of actual responses we've had so far from the 200 plus properties and where we're at on that and progress?
Yeah, so at the moment, as of today, we've had 65 replies out of 205.
Nick Philpott, do you want to just compare that to a similar scheme you did in Leatherhead and Fetcham?
Yeah, hi, George. I think from the first mail out, that's a fairly standard return of sort of 30 to 40%. We ended up for Leatherhead undertaking at least 3 different tranches of mail outs and public events to understand the issue and to get the perception across to the public. So you tend to find those who have been historically flooded will without doubt respond sooner than those who are just at a modelled risk and have had no history. So generally for a scheme, you tend to sort of look at about a 60% take-up rate. So I'd expect that number to increase with more publicity and as word gets around with the project.
Thanks, Nick. So just a couple here, maybe one for Tor. So am I right in assuming that no work will be carried out to the area to improve drainage infrastructure and prevent flooding to our properties? Basically, houses will still flood and gather water.
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. So no, that's not right. What the analysis has shown is that there is no single large-scale intervention such as a dam or a flood or a bund or a big box that we can put all the water into. So the property flood resilience measures are things that stop the water getting into the house itself, and that's the sort of the last point of protection when all of the other, or a number of the other options are simply not viable. In this case, there just isn't the physical space to put the volume of water within the catchment at the places where there is space available. But I've picked up on a couple of other things, and sort of a bit of a theme running through some of the questions that you've asked in terms of additional work. And there's another thing about the money pit. So what the expectation we have as people is that the highway drains will take all the water away that runs onto the road. Unfortunately, that's not what the highway drains have been designed to do. And in an area that's evolved rather than has been sort of planned as such as a new development would be, often the drainage systems, when they're designed, they do meet the drainage standards for highways that were prevalent at the time. But often where we then, pave over areas nearby the highway, that additional water also ends up going down the highway network and can inundate them. And even then, where we have increased capacity of the highway drainage network and the foul sewer network or the surface water drainage network, we're still not able to cope with the sort of storms that affected Caterham, Hill and Old Coulsdon in 2016. So there's been a series of things that are happening in addition to the piece of work that we're focusing on today. One is an improvement of the drainage network, the highway drainage network in Croydon and on the Surrey side of the border. That has reinstated a lot of the areas which were previously either damaged or silted up to the point where they're no longer working. That will hopefully deal with the majority of storms that occur. Where we don't have the ability to do that, we're also looking at other projects which look to use sustainable drainage, so areas where we slow the water up and stop the water actually getting onto the highway in the first place. And that's through intercepting it as water runs off roofs. And if we use the case in point as Caterham High Street as a sort of fairly neutral ground, for want of a better phrase, there's currently something in the order of 60 roofs that discharge just straight onto the highway there. And that highway network wasn't really designed to take up all that water. So how do we then reduce the rate that water affects the highway network or the foul network or the properties downstream of that area? So we're doing some work in addition to this property protection, property resilience, to look at how we do some interventions outside of that to do a further reduction in risk. And just to cover the money pit, I had a question earlier which was, what is the money pit? The money pit is a large water storage chamber at the north end of St Michael's Road, basically in the bottom of the dip there. It was cleaned out in 2016, and it was found initially the allegation was that the money pit was full and this and that. That wasn't really the case. It was about 25% of the capacity had been lost to silt, and that silt was then reduced or cleared out. So it was about 95% clear, and it's currently being monitored in order to see how quickly that silt accumulates. The previous maintenance before 2016 was in 1991. So it doesn't silt up quickly to the best of our knowledge, and that's why we're monitoring it so that we understand it a little better. I hope that goes some way to answering some of those questions.
Okay, there's another one, just a quick one. I think we've done a bit about planning policy, but stopping building until effective flood defence in the area, that's for Croydon. I don't know if Dicey wants to have a quick go at that. We've got a couple of minutes on this, so I'm just going to keep it rolling because we have got to stick to time.
Right, I'm just going to jump in and say, obviously we haven't got someone from our planning team on the panel today, but so I can't speak in terms of the planning policy. However, in terms of flood risk, I mean, all I can say is that we do obviously look at all the planning application majors at the moment, but we also help out with minors as well. So obviously we're kind of, wherever we can, making sure that we get to see all the drainage strategies, and all of these new developments are not adding to the well, they're not making the flood risk any worse than what it is at the moment. So until such time, yes, as the question says, we get to put measures in place, at least we're not making the situation any worse than what it is right now.
Thanks, Dicey. David Barrett, quick one regarding rain gardens. We're going to come on to that, so don't worry about that. We'll do that in a little bit. Andy Seal regarding traffic. Can we stop traffic going down roads to stop wash during a flood event? Asking for Court Road. Probably one for you.
So I'll pick up that one on traffic, if that's right, George.
Yeah.
So in terms of the speed at which the catchment reacts, to actually put up a traffic diversion would be, would be something that would, as a highway authority, we'd probably be unable to respond quickly enough for that to be effective. However, I think that that might be something that we can look at as part of the rain garden system that that Dave was speaking about in the question below, and it's something to keep raising, I think, so that we factor that into the scoping out of that rain garden, see what's within the realms of the possible. Just from an experience point of view, what I've seen where there is a road about 1.5 foot deep in water, and that is actually barriered off with concrete, I have seen people just shift that stuff out of the way so that they can drive down the road. So even if barriering or signage would be put out, my experience is that it has not been effective at stopping people going through those areas.
Right, very quickly, Julie, there's a one here about turnover. Maybe Julie, if you could pick this one up. something highlighted in local papers to improve the awareness and things like that, with people, much turnover in the people that live in those certain properties, or it might be one for Emma Crofts, but if you can have a little go, Julie.
Okay, am I unmuted?
No, you're all good.
Right, okay, hello everyone, it's Julie. So with regards to the turnover, we're doing as much as we possible in the community to raise awareness, flooding social media and Facebook with posts about flooding and drains and what to do, how not to block over drive, how to protect your property and become more resilient. So yeah, it's a tricky one, and obviously the fact that sometimes we don't know that when people are flooded. Through the grapevine we get to hear information, but some people don't want the community to know that they're flooded because they think it's going to affect their insurance and their resale. It's a bit of a tricky one, but we have just got to all be more aware and just keep raising it, and then with all the things put in place in time, we should manage the flood risk. Thanks,
Julie. I think we'll come on to community awareness and things like that a bit later on in a bit more detail with what Steve's talking about. How are we doing on time, Steve? Am I overrunning?
I think we're pretty much at the end of question time, so as not to compress everything else, perhaps we should move on. Yeah, thanks everyone for all your comments and questions and queries. We'll go through those after the meeting and make sure that any we've missed we pick up on and report back on through the frequently asked question document, and there'll be links to that at the end of the meeting. Yeah, keep the comments and queries coming because it provides a record for us from the meeting. Even if we don't get round to everything, you know, just getting some expertise and comments in is very useful. But I think if we move on now to the next section, the next theme, which is session 3 out of 5, and we're going to look at the whole community sort of flood risk management measures, some of which were mentioned in that chat there. So first we've got a short presentation from George from Surrey County Council, followed by Emma from the Environment Agency, which deal with different aspects of broader community-based flood risk sort of management and awareness and resilience building. So again, we'll take the presentations one after the other, keep the comments and questions going, and then we'll open it up to the panel after these presentations. Okay, so first up is George, I think.
I'm quickly going to talk through the wider work that is happening in the area. Queen's Park has been included in Tandridge District Council's Priority Spaces initiative. We're looking to include features that will store water and slow the runoff during a heavy rainfall event as they repurpose that bit of land. Still using it for what it's used now, but in just improving how it can be used. Hillcroft Primary School. It's very early days, but Surrey have had initial discussions with the school. We're considering swales and potentially planters, like you can see at the bottom picture of this image. These ideas will store water and slow the runoff. We're currently investigating infiltration rates and ground penetrating radar to see what can be achieved in the school there. So that bit of work, those investigation bits of work are happening in the next probably 2 months. Natural flood management in Coulsdon Common. London Borough of Croydon are leading on this and taking it forward. They'll be in discussion with City of London, who own the land, and see what can be achieved there. So hopefully we can store a little bit of water and just take some of the peak off in those heavy rainfall events. A range of SuDS solutions. As you can see on the top right, we've got a vision there of just what could be done. We've used Court Road with build outs and that sort of thing. Again, alongside the work on Hillcroft Primary School, we're investigating with ground penetrating radar and infiltration rates in sites around Caterham on the Hill. As it's on the highway, this will be a slightly longer piece of work, as there's highway safety issues such as sight lines, etc., that need to be considered. Water butts and rain gardens I'm going to come back to, but we are trying to take that forward. Emerging local plan. Tandridge District Council carried out a large amount of consultation work in autumn 2019. That plan is currently with the Inspectorate and Tandridge are awaiting feedback. Property flood resilience we've talked about quite a lot so far in this evening's presentations. This slide shows how making a community greener, the flood risk can be reduced. There are also wider benefits such as biodiversity, mental health, air quality, reduction in heat islands and water quality. You can hopefully see that vegetation slows the flow of water in larger rainfall events and reduces the pressure on the drainage systems in an area. What you're looking at here is from a piece of work called Thames 21. Here we can see what the community can do right now to reduce the risk of flooding. The top left picture shows how a downpipe can be connected to a water butt and then has a channel taking any overspill to a rain garden, which is fundamentally a low spot, basically a flower bed, with appropriate plants that are happy in drought or wet conditions. The picture in the middle at the top shows a planter style rain garden. The design of this takes again water off the roof by a downpipe into a storage area with plants which are appropriate for drought and wet conditions. There is an overflow in case it's inundated in a very heavy storm, and that can either go again to irrigation or back into the drainage system which the downpipe already went to. And there's a good example here of this being at the bottom and the middle of Hebden Bridge, and bottom right is a similar system that's been developed by Thames Water. The top right is an idea from the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. Using a plastic storage container, the sort you'd keep clothes under your bed, you can create a wetland habitat in your own back garden. And the bottom left is from the Royal Horticultural Society. Alternative to hard paved parking, and really demonstrates what can be achieved with a little imagination. And this slide just has some useful links for you to have a look at where we've got some great examples of what can be done by a community to reduce the risk of flooding through a few initiatives on their own.
Hello, I'm Emma from the Environment Agency. George has spoken to you about how the community could work together to reduce the risk of flooding. And I'm going to talk for the next few minutes about the resources that are available to help you prepare for an emergency, to help your community prepare, and what you can do to help your community. There's lots of information available on the Surrey Prepared web pages. These are hosted on the Surrey County Council website. The quickest way to find them is to go to the Surrey County Council website and search in the top corner, Surrey Prepared. On the Surrey Prepared front page, you'll find lots of links to useful information for preparing yourself, your business, or your community for an emergency. And I will talk through a few of those resources that are available to you in just a moment. There is also information available on the gov.uk pages, preparing for an emergency and also preparing for flooding. This includes a personal flood plan and guidance and template for a community flood plan that could be useful for any size of community, such as a school, church, sheltered accommodation, neighbourhood, village, etc. In order to prepare for an emergency, it's important to think about what you might need, where you might need to go, and who you might need to tell. The In Case of Emergency form hosted on the Surrey Prepared website is a really useful tool to help you prepare this information in advance. From the main page, just click In Case of Emergency and you will find a 2-page form that you can download which I will run through now, to help you keep all of those bits of information handy whenever you may need them. The first page of the In Case of Emergency form is the place to record all of your important contact information, such as contact details for those people who live in your house, information about dependents you may have, such as those who may need picking up from school or from work, where you might be able to meet somebody or stay in case of an emergency, any family or neighbours who may need help, either from you or from someone else, and who you can call if you need help. It also sets out some helpful tips to remind you of the things you might need to do or think about in case you are asked to leave your home, and what you might do if you are returning to your home after an emergency. We recommend that you keep this plan in a printed copy where you can get to it easily, and also store it on any mobile devices you may have, so you have the information with you all the time. The second page of the form is the place to keep the details of where you can get information, such as useful web links or contact details for organisations or emergency services. You can also record important information, such as contact details for your home or contents insurer or car insurer. Keeping a note of your policy numbers here could be helpful in case you can't get to your policy documents in an emergency. You could put down details of your service providers, for example gas, electric or water, and any details you might need in relation to any animals you might have. It's also a good place to note down any medication you take in case you need to leave your home in an emergency and you don't have your repeat prescription with you. There is information about local radio stations who may broadcast useful bulletins from emergency services or other organisations. It might be worth thinking about whether you would like to share your plan with a neighbour, friend or family member, so you have each other's contact information and know where each other might go in an emergency. There is more information and guidance available on the gov.uk website, and if you think you may also need a personal flood plan for your household, you can download one from the gov.uk website. Just search Prepare for Flooding. It's a good idea to make use of the number of free warnings and alerts that are available if you haven't already done so. Whilst there isn't a warning service for surface water flooding, the Environment Agency does provide a flood warning service for groundwater flooding in your area. You can sign up for this for free at the gov.uk website, Sign Up for Flood Warnings. Or you can go to the front page of the Surrey Prepared website and click on the Sign Up to Alerts link. The Met Office also issue a number of alerts. These are very useful in your area as they can warn of the heavy, intense rain that can cause surface water flooding. You can get these for free by signing up on the Met Office website or downloading the Met Office app. You can sign up to receive Twitter alerts. Twitter alerts are tweets published by some public agencies and emergency services during a crisis or emergency that contains up-to-date information. When you sign up, these messages will appear on your Twitter feed. These alerts are often shared on the Surrey Prepared Twitter feed as well. Just follow @SurreyPrepared. The Red Cross have a free app available that you can download and use in case of a first aid emergency. There is a link for this on the Surrey Prepared pages. This is a good time to think about how you could share this information with your neighbours. What if you're the first person to see that an alert has been issued? How can you make sure the community is aware and everyone can prepare?
Great. Thank you, George and Emma. So we have a little pause maybe just for any comments or questions in respect of those two presentations. I can see there's a couple come up now, but if we just give a little bit of time for you to think and to write, and then we'll pitch those over to the panel again.
Shall I make a start with some of those ones that have come in, Steve?
Yeah, if you like, yeah. People can just keep adding to those.
This might be one for Viv. I think it's really a planning one about AstroTurf I think the question is really about hard surfaces and can they be controlled? So that's something you can maybe...
I can give some information advice about that. I mean, with respect to hard standing, sometimes it doesn't actually require planning permission. So if this AstroTurf was in your that property's back garden, then they can pretty much do what they like in terms of hard standing, as long as it's incidental to the dwelling house. They don't need to provide any sustainable drainage measures. But if it's between the front of the house and the highway, then they should, if it's over a certain square meterage, so 5 square meters, it should be either made porous materials, or provision should be made to direct the runoff into a permeable or porous area. But if it's in the back garden, then there's probably not much, whichever, I don't know if it's Croydon or Tandridge, but there's probably not much the authority can do about it, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you, Viv. Probably not the answer Angela wanted, but at least it's an answer. Thank you. Hazel has asked about the 6 planters have appeared on the high street, and they don't appear to, well, they don't have any downpipes going into them. They're just freestanding. Wonder if there's any reasoning behind this, or if they've been misplaced. I can probably answer that, although, yeah. So this is an initiative that was not linked to us. That was done, I think it's the local horticultural society. Julie, I'm sure, will come in and help me and make sure I get the right people. They've done a local initiative with the school, to get some people doing planting, just to improve the aesthetics of that area. Sadly, they were a bit ahead of us, so we haven't managed to make those attenuating or water storage planters. We'd be very happy to do that with people in that area, and Julie has done a great effort of trying to, and the parish council on, and we've been trying to sort of get a link in there we've offered planters to them if they would like to plant them up, as it were. So leave that one with us is probably what I'm trying to say. I would love to see some planters down the sides of the high street, and I think we've got the ability to do it. We just need to action it in happening. And what happens to the ones that are currently there? Maybe they go somewhere else, or they stay as well. I don't know. Jeff saying, yeah, if you can help, that would be really, yeah. If you can help on that project, Jeff, you've got much more contacts on the ground than I have. So please put your thumbs up. We will lean on you heavily to enable us to get some planters throughout that catchment, throughout the catchment. Great, says Hazel. That's it.
George, I have a question that's come through direct to me. Can I just forward it just now? Questions come through really around kind of bollard or protecting where the highway drains are, essentially to facilitate maintenance. I think that's a really sound idea. The thing that would limit us on that is where we are as an authority, we're not flush with cash for maintenance. This would be an additional burden on that, certainly in the short term, whilst implementing a sort of bollarding thing. What we have done though is changed the way our contractor works, so that rather than them checking to see if they can access the drain and then never going back ever, currently what they will do is they've got a set period where they have to return to that particular location. What we've never, or I've never managed to achieve comprehensively is things like parking restrictions or even parking informatives prior to the drainage maintenance happening, except early last year, where we did a concentrated maintenance effort on the gullies in Caterham Hill. So there's still some room for improvement there.
Okay, thanks, Tor. There's another one come in about basically saying would water butts be sufficient to reduce the amount of water coming down, particularly Money Road, in a heavy downpour. Beth, you've done some quite detailed modelling on this sort of thing, and we're not saying it's the solution, but do you want to just talk us through it?
Yeah, so we looked into modelling, well, we modelled both installing water butts across the catchment and installing different SuDS solutions across the catchment. And both of those options came up, and the modelling demonstrated that they would reduce the flood risk in the catchment. The water butts, obviously they provide less volume of storage, so they reduce the flood risk less. But it's the case of,
in comparison to what? Do you want to give us?
Oh yeah, sorry. In comparison to the other SuDS solutions that we included, so for example, rain gardens or swales, the other different types of SuDS, and it showed that every little helps, and it really showed that every sort of contribution towards storing a volume of water does help the flood risk in the catchment.
Thanks, Beth. I don't know if Al, is there anything you'd like to add on that, just because you've been quite involved in that bit of work?
Not really, other than that, obviously the more water we can slow through the whole catchment, then those small interventions add up to a cumulative effect. So trying to stop the water getting into the low points throughout the catchment is probably key to this.
Steve, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. You're up north, and there's a really effective program called Slow the Flow. I know that you've seen up there. Do you want to just give us a very, very brief overview of the work they've done and the actual achievements?
Yeah, Slow the Flow is based in Calderdale, which has suffered multiple incidents of flooding over the last few years. I think this February it was flooded yet again. There was a big flood in Boxing Day 2015, and that was really the impetus for a lot of community-based flood planning. So although the Environment Agency were heavily involved in the local authority and other sort of water company, Yorkshire Water, in terms of the response and the recovery, it was a kind of impetus for people to come together within the community to actually ask themselves, well, what could we do to make a difference? And I was involved in helping the community develop a flood plan for the catchment. And I went to the first meeting, which was above a pub in Hebden Bridge, where people came together who said, well, why don't we form an organisation that could actually use citizen science to find, to understand the catchment better, and to work with the local authority, with the Environment Agency, with Yorkshire Water, with the National Trust, who own a lot of land in the catchment, and other landowners and businesses, to actually make a difference. And over the last 3 years, they've just done a tremendous amount of data collection and analysis and measuring and using that information about the sort of flow of water through the catchment to put in place a lot of natural flood management measures. So they've been doing a lot of work around the catchment, sort of at weekends, installing leaky dams and ponds and rediverting rivers and putting in rain gardens and addressing some of the sustainable drainage issues. And not only have they made an impact, because I think they measured the sort of peak flow of the flood from the last flooding, and actually they managed to reduce that peak of flooding, which had then a knock-on effect in terms of the flooding that actually happened in the last sort of big storm. So they have made a tangible difference. But also at the same time, I think it's been a very sort of community building process in terms of people sort of understanding the risks, understanding what they could do as a community, understanding how people can collaborate across a range of different organisations, of building really good relationships and sort of friendships within the community. And I think also the ability to sort of respond more quickly and more effectively in subsequent flood events. So they're very much sort of focused on not necessarily sort of barricading themselves against flooding now, but how do we live alongside water? How do we live better with water? How do we respond to the pressures of climate change? Which is not dissimilar to the project I was going to talk briefly about in a minute. But if you go onto, in the notes from this meeting, there'll be a link to their website, Slow the Flow. And they've recently commissioned a filmmaker to make a 15-minute film, which documents all the work that they've been doing over the last few years. And it is quite inspiring, I think, just to see how a community has, taken some of the challenges rather than just sort of asking other people to do things all the time. They've actually said, well, how can we contribute as a community to build resilience in this catchment, and how do we work better with the institutions that normally sort of manage flood risk. And I think through their work, they've actually enabled the local authority and the Environment Agency and Yorkshire Water and landowners to work better together as well. So it's been quite an inspiring initiative, and definitely worth visiting their website, I think.
Just jumping in there a little bit, Steve, you talked about quite a lot of stuff that's sort of countryside based in an urban setting. Can you just maybe what they've achieved, because I think most of that's in Hebden Bridge. Can you just give us just a couple of examples? Not
I mean, it might even be worth organising a webinar and getting some of the people from Slow the Flow and perhaps other community-based initiatives to speak to interested people in Caterham and Old Coulsdon. I could certainly organise that, and they'd be more than pleased to do it. Because I haven't had direct contact with them for a little while, but I know they've some of the things that George was talking about in terms of tree planting in an urban area, creating reprofiling watercourses, putting in rain gardens, encouraging the use of water butts and so on, putting in property level flood resilience in collaboration with the Environment Agency and the local authority. So they've been doing all the type of things that George has just been talking about. But I think also they've in terms of just the the sort of social and kind of psychological and addressing sort of mental health issues and anxiety, they've done a lot of work just with existing community groups to work with their members to know that there's a support network out there to support people who are at risk of flooding or have been flooded or maybe flooded in the future. So again, it's they're not just working on a sort of installing measures, they're also working on sort of community community building initiatives that enable the whole community to deal better with the threat of flooding, given that they're in a very floody catchment, not dissimilar to Caterham and Old Coulsdon in that respect.
Okay, can I ask a question of the people that are attending, so the participants, as it were? I think at the bottom of your screen there's something called reactions. This is going to be a bit off the hoof, but you can do a thumbs up. Who would be interested in finding out more about those small scale interventions alongside the PFR, if that makes sense? So just give us a hand, give you a thumbs up. Okay. Looks like a reasonable number. Thank you for my off the hoof. That's great. Thank you very much. Okay. I think we're probably looking at the watch. We need to move on a little bit, Steve. So
we're pretty much on time, which is great. And again, thanks very much for comments, queries. Sorry we've had to mute everyone, but with quite a big meeting, we thought more people would be able to ask more questions and get more responses if we handled it in terms of making comments and then getting the panel to respond. But we could always set up something in a different format. Which kind of brings me to my brief intervention, and I've probably said quite a lot of it already. But there is an initiative which is being funded and supported by the Environment Agency, by DEFRA, by Welsh Government and by Natural Resources Wales, which is called a collaborative learning project, working together to adapt to a changing climate, flood and coast, which isn't exactly the most catchy title, but it kind of says what it's trying to do. And fortunately, in a way, it provides more resources for Caterham and Old Coulsdon. But Caterham has become, or has been selected as one of 2 pilot areas, which people may be aware of in the country, to participate in this initiative. It was I suppose, a competitive process, which Surrey County Council led the application with the partnership of the Borough of Croydon and Thames Water and the District Council and the Flood Action Group and other local the Parish Council and so on, and put a very strong sort of case for an initiative which would look a little bit more broadly at the potential future impacts, or actual and future impacts, of climate change, and how Caterham could build resilience to those potential threats. So the initiative's been running for, well, it started at the end of 2018, and I've been leading from an engagement perspective. So my organisation, Icarus, has been asked to work with local people, local groups, local organisations and authorities to bring together a sort of broad-based steering group. And really the aims of the initiative is to look that little bit wider into the future and into that sort of uncertain impact in terms of how will climate change sort of impact on first of all flooding, but it could also be in terms of drought, or it could be in terms of other things that climate change will affect. And how can the community as a whole community, not just the people who are flooded, sort of understand the risks better, be better ready to respond to those, and what might they do? Can we build the capacity of the community to be able to plan and to take actions better, so that it's in a better position to respond to the broader challenges of climate change. And as we know, there's more likely to be stormy weather, there's more likely to be heavy rainfall, there's more likely to be periods of no rain. And how does a catchment like the one that you're all living in better able to respond to that sort of shift in climate? So it's been a little bit disrupted, obviously, because of the COVID-19 situation. But we were at the point the steering group's been meeting regularly, and it's been involving people from sort of community-based organisations like the Flood Action Group and A Better Caterham and the Climate Action Group, as well as the sort of authorities and the water company. And we've been developing and trialling a community conversation method whereby people could come together to discuss these issues. We're trying to develop a sort of simulation, so a place that is a little bit like Caterham. It's pictured a little bit into the future. It has the same sort of pressures and difficulties and challenges, but it gives people a little bit of freedom to discuss how, as a community, might we respond to those upcoming challenges. How can we increase the capacity to plan and make decisions, and how can we increase the capacity of the community to work, cohesively and coherently to address some of those challenges. So it's not dissimilar to what I was describing as what's going on in Calderdale, and in Hebden Bridge in particular, and some of the things that George and Emma have been talking about. But what we're hoping is that we're able to roll that out more comprehensively during the autumn. So it's yet to be seen whether we can actually come together and meet, or whether we have to do some sort of virtual discussion groups, a little bit like we've been doing this evening, but perhaps with fewer people, so that we can have a little bit more interactivity. and to actually use a simulation to explore some of the key issues and to explore how we as a whole community can respond to that. And the idea then was that we would debrief that, and the learning from trying to tackle some of the pressures and to explore some of the options that might be available. How do we then bring that back to reality and use it in a way that can put measures in place over a longer term in the catchment to address the issues that climate change might bring. So that's a little bit sort of convoluted explanation, but what I'd encourage people to do, and we'll put in the notes, is if people are interested, and I know a lot of people on the call have participated already in the initiative, there's at least another 12 months for this project to run, and there's resources to enable us to support the community in that planning process. Is to get in touch really, so that when we are able to roll it out a little bit more, we can contact you and hopefully come and facilitate some of those discussions, either within your community groups or within your business or within your workplace or within schools. There could be a program of these community conversations in the autumn. So again, we probably haven't got much time for questions about this now, but if you've got any comment or questions, or you'd like to be involved a little bit more, please put them in the chat before we finish, and I'll make sure they're picked up and we get back in touch with you. And as part of that, as I was saying before, we can also organise other groups from around the country to speak to you, if that would be helpful, about their experience and the way and some of the innovative ways that they've been working. Does that make sense? Anyone on the panel like to mention anything who've been involved to date in this project?
I would just say in putting this together and lots of other bits of work that we've been doing to try and sort of move things forward, the way we've worked together on that project has really helped to improve our links and our reach into the community, and it's been a very positive process for us so far.
Great, smashing. So it's certainly nowhere near finished. So please do get involved if you can. Please do get involved, and we'll send out some further details in the notes from this meeting. Right, it's all remains to be 5 minutes to go, and we're bang on time. So I'll pass back to Tor just to talk a little bit about, draw things together a bit, and to talk about the next steps, how people can actually get involved and find out more information from all the things that we've discussed this evening on the meeting. Okay, Tor.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you everybody for your participation, particularly on the chat, which has been one of your real success. Has raised some pretty important points and pretty pungent points that perhaps need a bit more scrutiny going forwards, and we'll get the detail of those questions out within the follow-up correspondence to the meeting. So thank you very much for raising those points. In terms of the look ahead, this is really what we're kind of here for, and there's kind of two components to it. So to try and keep it simple, I've tried to draw it out into two areas. One which is very much focused on what you as an individual or as a member of the community or as a community can do, and the other bits that you must scrutinise us as the authority group, and perhaps the third group, on in the future look. But I'll start off with the bits perhaps for you and for you as a community. So notebook and pencils out. So first of all, if you haven't had a letter from Surrey County Council with regards to the property flood resilience measures, please get in touch on either the email address that's on the screen now, or phone in, preferably during the working day, to the number 0300 200 1003. specifically address it to either Al Davis or George Rice, and that means that it will get to the right place. And just to highlight, and this has come up, certainly Hazel is one of them, the effect that your property has had and that it's been flooded, and that you haven't received a letter yet, and that will then get you the inquiry to fill out that questionnaire. If you have received one of those letters, please do fill it in and obviously return it to us, because that's us forming the business case to take to the national programme team at the Environment Agency, who are the people who we hope are holding the purse strings for, as Beth described, up to about 75%, 74-75% of the funding for the interventions that we think are viable. The other bit is to keep an eye on our frequently asked questions document or web page, which is on, that's actually not linked, but we'll send the link out with a copy of this presentation. So keep an eye on that. If there are additional questions that we've not covered that you have, please keep in touch. A good way of doing that is through the Flood Action Group's action plan. That's the structure of questions which they meet with the authorities on and address to the multi-agency group. So it's quite a good way of getting a comprehensive answer to any detailed questions that you may have. And I think the other bit is, if you'd like to be more involved in the journey that we are all on in Caterham and Old Coulsdon, a good way of doing that is working with the Flood Action Group, and perhaps get in touch with them directly and see if you're able to join, or at least become an associate member to give them some assistance. They've done some outstanding work, which I think is something to be championed around the community. In terms of what you must look to us to do, I've sort of penned out a bit of a programme of what you should expect from us over the next few months. So firstly, we're going to use the feedback and the questions that you've asked on this during this forum to add into the business case that we'll submit to the Environment Agency. So a bit of ground truthing around what's going on, how you as a community, as individuals, feel about the measures that are proposed. In early August, we will submit the business case to the programme board. Just to translate that bullet point, which is the second one down on the right hand side, that's the outline business case to the Environment Agency programme board. And in amongst all of that, on the 30th of July, we will be having a multi-agency meeting. That's where the Flood Action Group host a meeting with all of the agencies that are involved, so Environment Agency, County Council, London Borough of Croydon, Tandridge District Council, and Thames Water, to address the specific concerns of the day within Caterham itself. I think further into the future, so into the medium term, towards the tail end of this year, I think we have an aspiration to host a similar event to this for those who are going to be affected by the property resilience measures, property level resilience project. And hopefully by then we'll be able to have an update on the funding, what the timescales are for that project and any interventions there. And hopefully by then we'll have appointed a contractor if all of the ducks are in a line. And the last bit is returning your calls that you requested from the questionnaires. So if you've asked for a call, please expect that over the next couple of weeks as the guys get around to going through that data. So that's the trajectory looking forwards. In the meantime, you will no doubt have concerns about ongoing maintenance of things like highway drains and other such things. Please keep reporting that on the website. Obviously, report to your local members as well, but the most effective way for us to track our performance is through those hits on our Report It website for Surrey County Council. I know that Croydon has a very similar setup for particularly highway drainage reporting. So please keep reporting to us online and keep that feedback cycle running because it's very, very helpful. Other than that, I think thank you very much for everyone on the panel who's fielded a question or fielded some multiple questions. And thank you very much again, everyone, for having such an active participation in what's a relatively clunky method of engaging with people. Cheers.
Tor, I think Julie would just like a quick word about the next third action group meeting. That's all right. Is that right, Julie?
Brill.
Are you there, Julie?
Sorry. So yes, if anyone's got any additional questions, if you're on social media, on Facebook, you can find me on the local pages, and you can send me a direct message. We've also got an email address, which is catocrafag@gmail.com. You can send me any questions, and as Tor mentioned, we have an action plan, which this has been a living document, which has been going on for 4 years now. So every 3 months we have a multi-agency meeting, and that's when all the questions that come from the community go via the action plan. Everyone's sat around one table, and everyone gets this in theory a month in advance, although I'm a bit late this month. So all those questions will go in and be answered on your behalf. So please feel free to email me or get in touch. Equally, if you've got some questions you want me to come out and explain to a group of neighbours, I'm perfectly willing to fill in some any gaps you might have. So to reiterate, our next multi-agency meeting is on the 31st of July. So before then, get your questions in. Thank you.
Right.
And thanks for all the support of all the authorities. Mammoth effort here, so thanks very much.
Lovely, thank you, Julie. Yeah, it just remains for me to say, reiterate Tor's thanks to everybody, to everyone who participated, to all the panel members and speakers. Yeah, not easy doing it virtually, but I think it's been a really useful meeting, and thanks so much for all your participation. And again, everyone looks forward to working together over the next months and years to sort of, make things better in Caterham and Old Coulsdon with regard to flooding and, the challenges of climate change in the long term.